right, guys. Today we're going to be looking at um, philosophers, writers, scientists, all kinds of people from the golden age of Greece, or um, best known as the age of Pericles. Um, a lot of peace, prosperity, especially in Athens. Athens was forming the Delian League, had lots of money to devote to a lot of these different things that we're going to look at today. And it really brought out a new sort of level of thinking. And definitely the Greeks were pioneers in that, especially when it comes to philosophy. So, what is philosophy? Philosophy is the study of the basic questions of reality and human existence. It sort of examines things in a different way, less, I guess, what you would consider logical, concrete, but more abstract thoughts in general. It's not to say that philosophy doesn't use some kind of logic, but at the same time, philosophical things are often, unproven in a lot of ways. Philosophy was really used in Greeks wanted to understand themselves and the world around them. And one of the martial arts guys that I used to train with in Radford, I have a black belt under him. His name is Dr. Jerry Beasley. And he has a doctorate in philosophy. And one of the things he does is he really teaches a lot of philosophical type martial arts stuff. It's a lot of what ifs. What if this happens and, this martial art would be best and so on and so forth. Whereas, I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, and we pretty much just like to fight and prove that our martial art is better than everyone else's, at least originally. Of course, MMA is a lot different than it was back when it originally started. But I always think about Dr. Beasley because he was a real thinker, a philosopher, a guy who thought a lot about martial arts, thought a lot about things, and a really nice guy, good guy. But he loved to talk, about, for example, he could never really understand why, guys fought in MMA. He had never been in a fight. He said he had never had to be in a fight. So, a lot of guys who train martial arts for years and never really fight, never, I guess, fully understand how practical martial arts is or can be. And a lot of times they don't even know if it works. So our philosophy has always been, you practice and you prove it in competition. But, his philosophy was always, I don't have to fight. And knowing martial arts helps me not fight. So I always think about him. He is a real good guy at Radford University, Dr. Jerry Beasley. So a philosopher means a lover of wisdom. And if you want to be wise, you have to think about things, you have to study, and you have to, use some sort of things for reason. Reasoning, you may not come up with the answer all the time, but you can come close to the answer, especially in abstract ideas like, love or, death or why are things the way they are. So philosophers believe all of nature is based upon certain truths, and they could discover these truths through reason. So we're going to look at the three main philosophers, and always remember the acronym SPA, okay? That'll help you know. And that's really all you have to know is their order and kind of what they were all about. The first one is always my favorite. His name is Socrates, okay? Socrates was an annoying pest. He's your modern day, what you would find today would be like a troll on Facebook or something like that. Someone who always wants to argue with someone, all right? Someone who roasted people, made them look bad. Very smart. And even today, his method of questioning is used in things like the courtroom. Lawyers use his questioning methods to try to trip people up and catch them in their lies. Very, very intelligent guy who liked to roast people. he always asked why. Why? Okay. So someone would say, well, I really don't like that person. Why? Well, he has the same business as I. Well, what makes him any worse than you? You both have the same business. Well, he makes me, work harder because I have to compete with him. Well, if you have to work harder, doesn't that make you a better person? His competition makes you a better person because you have to work harder to compete with him. So, Socrates was good at sort of, tripping you up on your own words. A lot of the politicians there, the people who had power, didn't really like that. Okay. His students had to think for themselves. Think about how, and this is where he doesn't go, hey, what's the answer to this question? There's no real one answer. He's like, you can think up your own answer. Think for yourself, question authority. He was greatly loved by his students and the people who admired him, but he had powerful enemies. If he's always asking questions and always bugging people, okay, you can see where public officials are going to be like, we don't really like that. He made them look foolish. I think about even questioning like politicians, for example, your city council members and people like that. If you question them, a lot of times they like to say one thing, but they really mean another thing. And once you question them, you can catch them in their, lies and things of that nature. So Socratic questioning is like this, okay? Why are you saying that? What does this mean? So, like, if you were saying, let's say you were on the stand, a person's on the stand, not you personally, but and he says, well, I didn't drink that much. I know I'm charged with drunk driving, but I didn't, drink that much. Well, what does this mean? What do you mean that much? Did you have 10 cups? Did you have 8 cups? When someone would try to change the subject, he would say, well, what does this even have to do with what we're talking about? Okay. Especially if a person is like, let's say you're talking politics and you're saying one thing, then the person goes off on another sort of tangent. Well, what does this have to do with that? What is the nature of this? What do we already know? Using what we've seen in the past and saying, well, look, here's what we know about this. What you're saying is different. Giving me an example, he would use the example to sort of argue against it. It's debate. If you're debating someone, you use what they have and you use it against them. Can you rephrase that? Tell it to me like I'm an 8-year-old, okay? Are you saying this? Are you saying that? He's really good at questioning. Socratic questioning is what lawyers do even to this day. Now, people didn't like him questioning. If someone, it's like that kid that says why all the time. Why? Well, my son, when he was little, I was like, you can't play video games all day. Why? Well, because you're not supposed to, be in front of the television. You need to get outside and play. Why? It's annoying. Okay, so a lot of people look at Socrates like he was some sort of pest. So he criticized democracy, saying unskilled people should not hold positions of power. He would look at, and democracy was, excuse me, everyone would go to the same place and vote, like what we consider a direct democracy. And he basically said people weren't smart enough to understand, what government was and how government operated. And he said that these people should not hold positions of power and these people should not be, in control of the government. Now, because he drove so many people crazy, Socrates' enemies falsely accused him of denying the existence of the Greek gods. Right? And back then, once again, Socrates had no scientific means. This is way before Christianity or anything, of either confirming or denying the gods. He probably asked people, questions about the gods, but his enemies falsely accused him of denying the existence of many of the Greek gods, which turned people against him. He was tried for corrupting the minds of Athenian youth. And when he goes to trial, of course, he argues there and argues with them, and he's found guilty. He is sentenced to drink poison hemlock, and this is one of the most famous paintings. It's of him sitting on the bed getting ready to drink the poison hemlock that will kill him, and he's arguing to the very end. Okay, and a lot of his students are in the picture. One of the guys that we see next is in the picture as well. Okay, so Socrates is executed for, basically bugging everyone and, asking them questions and driving them crazy. So his greatest student was Plato. Plato founded the Academy, a special school in Athens for teaching philosophy. He wrote the dialogues and imaginary discussions with, several people, including Socrates. He felt perfection could not be reached in the physical world, and that the perfect forms had been conceived by the gods. He saw human beings as having a soul and a body, kind of a new sort of thing. He also believed in reincarnation. You really don't have to know all that. Just know that he is the student of Socrates, and that he wrote The Republic, a long dialogue describing his view of a perfect society. His ideal government would be run by philosophers. So he thought that smart people, philosophers, would be the best people to run government. And in this republic, he outlines like a view of a perfect world, a world that doesn't really exist, in all honesty. Aristotle believed that every field of knowledge had to be studied logically. He actually attended the academy, which was created by Plato. So, and when you think about the philosophers, it goes like this: Spa, Socrates, S, P is Plato, and then A is Aristotle. One of the main things you need to know about him is Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great. He was much more thorough. He tried to collect as many facts as possible and organize them. But when Philip II eventually would conquer the Greeks, Aristotle did tutor Alexander, who would go on to basically rule over one of the largest empires the world has ever known. All right, during this time, mathematics, medicine, and science, I really loathe math. Math is probably my worst subject. If you have ever seen this guy right here, you know that he comes up with one of the most important things in math. His name is Pythagoras. And what is he best known for? A squared plus B squared equals C squared, also known as Pythagorean theorem. So you do need to know that. You need to know what that right there is, Pythagorean theorem. So Pythagoras is one of those guys that if I could go back in time, I'd probably go back and punch him in the nose. Early Egyptian thinkers tended to explain natural events as the work of gods and other forces. And so when science and math comes into the picture, you see that a lot of them can say, well, the natural world could be explained in, natural laws, things that just make sense, more of a scientific view of things. Another mathematician that you have to know, Euclid wrote a book about the basic ideas of geometry. If you take geometry here, you will be taking Euclidean geometry, which means this is basically the same geometry that Euclid came up with, a couple thousand years ago. Archimedes is a scientist who calculated the value of pi, the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. Okay, now what are they going to ask you on the test? Basically, he's a scientist, okay? He came up with a number of things. So he used math to explain how levers work, and you can see that there. It's like that seesaw. How does it work? I'm not a scientist or a math guy, but he could probably explain it to you. See down there that fulcrum. So he invented the compound pulley, and he invented the Archimedes screw, which draws up water. And you see how that works. It goes into the water, and you just turn the thing, and it draws water out. Kind of, almost similar to what you would find in the old school wells back then. Hippocrates was the founder of medical science, and I find him really interesting. My doctor is Dr. Pradhan in Danville, Virginia. I taught his son world history way back in the day, and I always think about Hippocrates when I think about him because, Hippocrates, once again, instead of thinking the gods were making people sick and saying, you're sick as punishment, he taught the disease comes from natural causes, right? Not as punishment from the gods. I always think about him because it's funny in this sort of way. He, just like Dr. Pradhan, he says that rest, fresh air, proper diet. My doctor's always on me about not eating salt. He's like, salt is not your friend. Proper diet was the best cure for whatever ails you. This is as true as anything. If you're exercising, you get lots of sleep, you get fresh air, you get outside, you play, you're going to be better off than if you sit in front of a screen all day. So, Hippocrates and doctors today take what's called the Hippocratic Oath. This comes from Hippocrates himself. It basically says, I will do no harm. Your doctor, he can save your life, but he can also, take your life. Your doctor can prescribe you stuff that makes you sick, and you wind up being allergic to it or something like that. Or if a surgeon can kill you just by dropping a knife in you, I guess. But so Hippocrates, people still take the Hippocratic Oath that says, I'll do no harm, and patient-doctor confidentiality. He also covers that. You can't really talk to other people about your patients and whatever is going on with them. So history. Greeks became the first people to take the writing of history seriously. And, when you think about that, the first historian, as a history teacher, this person is really kind of very important. His name was Herodotus. Herodotus was the first historian. He is called the father of history. He's known for things like writing about the Persian Wars, and also writing about, the Spartans. One thing, though, a lot of people look at him as a historian and realize that he is sort of a home team kind of guy. He looked at the Greeks and a lot of the battles and things as totally being so much better than the Persians, Greek lifestyle and everything. Maybe a less scientific approach to history and a little bit more biased, but still very important because he is considered the very first historian, aka the father of history. Thucydides believed that studying the past helped you understand human nature, and he looked at the Peloponnesian War in a more realistic light. Warfare, especially during this time period, is not pretty. It is one of those things that it's kind of scary, and bad things happen. You're especially look at the Spartans. They're cutting people's heads off, killing each other, stabbing each other, close-handing, hand-to-hand combat. And, Thucydides believed that, you had to be real about it. You had to keep keep it in context. You couldn't glorify war is basically what it is, because war is not pretty. It is, really a really bad thing. All right, so during the age of Pericles, this building was rebuilt. It is the Parthenon, and it was built to honor Athena. It's located in Athens, and the reason it was built on top of the Acropolis basically was to honor Athena and, being the patron goddess of Athens. This is considered the finest example of Greek architecture. It has perfectly balanced proportions, and these columns are called colonnades. We're going to look at the columns here in a minute. Inside is a larger statue of Athena, and what you need to know about this statue is that Phidias, almost like Phidias a verb, but this is Phidias, created the statue of Athena. He also created this 40-foot statue of Zeus at the Temple of Olympia. All right, continuing with architecture, there are three types of columns. You have to know and be able to identify each of the columns. The first one you see on the left is kind of the most plain block type column. It's called the Doric column. And then you have the Ionic column right beside there. To me, it looks kind of like a cinnamon roll on the two ends up there. And what you're looking at is the top, okay? Looks like two cinnamon roll things swirling in there. And then the Corinthian is more of your fancy looking one. Kind of almost looks like flowery type material up here at the top. Greek theater. Dramas containing action or dialogue and usually involving conflict and emotion. This is what the Greeks, they had tragedies, dramas, comedies, but dramas are plays containing action and dialogue and some sort of conflict. The Greeks carved outdoor theaters into the hillsides, and if you look at that, that's like an amphitheater you might see somewhere where you sit up top and you look down on all the action. Dramas were, very, almost morbid, little scenery. Audience relied on the chorus to describe the time and the place. What I always think about is the tragedies. Tragedies are usually involve a main character who struggled against fate or events. And who do I think about most? Okay, when I think about a tragedy, I think about Spider-Man. All right. So, what is the story of Spider-Man? Peter Parker, a young guy in high school, gets bitten by a radioactive spider. He starts getting powers, and in a lot of ways, he's not really a superhero or anything yet, and he has a hard time controlling them. But he realizes he's super strong, and he realizes a lot of things. So he sees this wrestling event where he can go and make $500 by pinning some wrestler who's supposed to be unbeatable. So he goes and he pins the wrestler, and as the guy's paying him, he walks out and he walks by a guy who robs the promoter and is running out. So Spider-Man could stop him, but he doesn't. And even the promoter goes, "Why didn't you stop him? You could have stopped him." He goes, "Well, it's really none of my business." So the guy who robs it goes down the steps and is running out. Peter Parker's uncle is picking him up from this event, and he's waiting for him in the car, and the guy shoots his uncle and kills him. So the tragedy is in fate. That's really what fate is all about. By not making the decision to stop the guy, his uncle paid the ultimate price and died for him. And that compels Peter Parker to become a superhero and to save everyone's life that he can by being a superhero. But even as a superhero, you have fate and, conflict, because he is your ultimate tragic figure. No matter what he does, he can't really win. He falls in love with a girl. He can't tell her he's Spider-Man. He could tell her he's Spider-Man. People figure out who he is, and they'll try to harm him by harming the people who are important to him. So whenever I think about tragic figures and tragedy, I think about Spider-Man. You do need to know these two guys. They were the most famous tragedy writers, Aeschylus and Sophocles. Okay. So one of the things too about that Spider-Man story is really in Greek tragedies, heroes were punished for displaying hubris, which is the sin of pride. Okay, it's almost like karma. If you think you're all that great, eventually someone's going to knock you down, and knock you down a peg or two. So heroes were punished for displaying hubris or the sin